Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are going to check out the science of addiction, biology, and pharmacology, looking at chapters 4 and 5. And so essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take a look under the hood, the machinery of addiction. Though I know what you're thinking. As soon as you hear me say that, you think, oh no, biology, chemistry, but stay with me. Because if you want to understand why your client just can't stop, you have to understand what is going on in their hardware. So let's start with the body's one and only goal here, homeostasis, okay? I want you to think of your body like a thermostat in your house. It always wants to be a comfortable 70 degrees. If it gets too hot, the AC kicks on. If it gets too cold, the heat kicks on. Addiction is basically a war against this thermostat. You take a drug, it turns the heat up to 100. The body panics and tries to cool it down. The constant battle between the drug and body's thermostat, that's the cycle of tolerance and withdrawal. This is known as the addiction loop. So we have two main systems that are running our show, right? We have the central nervous system. That's the center of your body. That's the brain and the spinal cord. And that is known as the command center, okay? Then there's the peripheral nervous system. That's the network of cables running out to your arms and legs. For this class, we care about that command center because psychoactive drugs primarily target the CNS. It's the target. So now within that CNS, that system, we have two modes. We have the sympathetic nervous system. This is the gas pedal. It's the fight or flight. Adrenaline, dilated pupils, heart racing, stimulants like cocaine and meth. They stand on the gas pedal. Then we have the parasympathetic system. This is the brake, the rest and digest. It slows everything down. So heroin, alcohol, benzodiazepines, they're going to slam on the brakes. This is why overdose looks different. So a stimulant overdose presents in the form of a heart attack. The engine blows, right? The opiate overdose is a respiratory failure. So the car stops moving. So how does the brain actually send all of these signals we're talking about? I want you to meet the neuron. Yes, I drew that picture. Think of a neuron as the postal service, okay? You have the dendrites, which is the mailbox that's receiving the letters or the signals. You have the axon, that's the mail truck carrying the message. You have the terminals, okay? And those are the delivery guy that's handing it off to you, right? Releasing the message. But here's the catch. Neurons never actually touch each other. So there's a tiny gap right there you can see called the synapse. The electrical signal hits the end of the line and it can't jump that gap. So it has to change into a chemical message in order to float across the gap. So here you see the synapse, right? That's where the magic happens. And by magic, I do mean addiction. So those chemical messengers, we call them neurotransmitters. You know these names. Dopamine is the do it again chemical. It's about reward, pleasure, motivation. Serotonin is going to handle your mood, your sleep, your appetite. GABA is your brain's natural Valium. It's going to help you calm down and keep you calm. And then we have endorphins. They're your natural painkillers. And then norepinephrine is your energy or your adrenaline. In this chart, you see the neurotransmitter and the type of effect. When it's talking about a type of effect, inhibitory means it's going to slow down the communication between the post office and the mailman, I guess, dropping off the message. The message is in the brain. So if it's an inhibitory effect, it's going to slow that down. If it's an excitatory effect, it's going to speed it up. Okay, so if we look at the do it again dopamine neurotransmitter, it has both the inhibitory and the excitatory effect. Okay, so it releases euphoria, but also like increases or impacts agitation, paranoia, motor changes, both gross motor changes, you're walking, and fine motor changes. Okay, And so some of the drugs of abuse that influence that neurotransmitter are going to be your amphetamines, methamphetamines, amphetamines like Ritalin, Adderall, those type of things as well fall into that category. Then your cocaine, and then any bath salt active ingredients will have that impact too. Next you see GABA, which is a neurotransmitter, an inhibitory neurotransmitter. We just talked about GABA, and it does sedation, relaxation, drowsiness, and depression. So drugs of abuse that influence that, alcohol, diazepam, anything that ends in PAMs, basically, and barbiturates all have that same impact, right? They're going to impact that neurotransmitter. Serotonin. Serotonin is an inhibitory, meaning it slows the messages down. So it will show up in your sleep, relaxation, sedation. So drugs of abuse that influence that, LSD, ecstasy, okay? Acetylcholine is both excitatory and inhibitory. It can impact mild euphoria, excitation, and insomnia. And so that is in tobacco and nicotine. Okay. Then you have your endorphins, your inhibitory effect, again, slowing things down, mild euphoria, blockage of pain, slow respiration, anti-stress, and that's coming from the drug of abuse in your narcotics category. And then your last one is your anandamide, and that's an inhibitory, and it impacts relaxation, gives an increased sense of well-being, and that is found in marijuana and some spice active ingredients. So next we have these chemicals. Let's go back to these chemicals for a second, right? They float across that gap and they're looking for a place to land. So where they land, that's called the receptor, okay? So receptors are protein locks on the receiving cell. So I want you to think of lock and a key. So a dopamine key can open a dopamine lock. So think about this. You can't open your front door with a car key, right? Drugs are the master forgers, you can say. They're the copycats. They look exactly like the key you already have, okay? They mimic these natural keys. So we'll call these copycats agonists, okay? So agonists mimic. So heroin is an agonist. It looks just like the shape of an endorphin. So it slides into that lock, turns it, and boom, euphoria. Now, your brain thinks that this is natural euphoria, this is a natural endorphin, but it's not. It's counterfeit key, okay? Then we have the antagonists. These are the blockers. So think of a key that fits in the lock, but it won't turn. It just sits there. And because it's sitting there, the real key can't get in. So this is like Narcan, okay? So it shoves heroin out of the lock and sits there and blocks it. This is how it can wake someone up from an overdose, okay? It prevents anything else from entering after it's gone in and blocks the receptor. So, and lastly, before we leave biology, a quick nod to the endocrine system. So if neurons, imagine, are like text messages, they're instant, then hormones are like snail mail, okay? They're slower, but they last longer. So this is where we see things like steroids and have a huge prolonged effect on mood and aggression. So you may have heard of roid rage, okay? Okay, so now let's switch over to software. We talked about hardware, right? How we're hardwired. Now let's talk about software, okay? So essentially pharmacology. So this is the math side of drug use. First rule, there is no such thing as a drug without side effects. We have intended effects, why you took the drug initially, and unintended effects, why you now have to pay for it, okay? So intended effects, pain relief, high, whatever. Unintended effects, nausea, drowsiness, ultimately dependence. So let's look at this dose response curve, okay, which is the relationship between the amount and the effect, okay? So common sense says if one pill feels good, two will feel twice as good. Pharmacology says wrong. There is a ceiling effect. So eventually you will hit a point where taking more doesn't get you higher, it just makes you sicker. You stop getting the benefit, but you keep getting the toxicity. So more is not always better, it's usually just more toxic. So potency and toxicity, we have to separate those, okay? So potency is how little do I need to get an effect, okay? So for potency, fentanyl is a high potency, meaning you only need a grain of salt, okay? Toxicity is how much is this going to impact my body? How much is it going to damage me? So just because something is potent doesn't mean it's toxic, but usually high potency makes it very easy to take too much accidentally. All right, so here now is the most dangerous slide in the deck, the margin of safety. So this is the gap between feeling good and not being able to feel anymore because you are no longer here, okay? So the margin of safety with marijuana, huge gap, okay? It's very hard to overdose, all right? You'd have to smoke a telephone pole to hit a legal dose, essentially. Heroin, very tiny gap, very, very, very tiny gap. So the dose that gets you high is also frighteningly close to the dose that stops your breathing, okay? And addiction narrows this gap even further. So what happens when the drug goes into your body? Okay, what the body does. We call it ADME. So you have absorption, right? How is it getting in, right? Smoking a drug and through IV, intravenous use, is the fastest way, and that typically takes seconds to go into your body and feel the effects. Eating it is slow, right? It has to metabolize, and it's in your thick lining of your stomach, okay? So that takes minutes, right? The faster it hits your body, the more addictive it becomes. Why? Because the brain loves speed, okay? It's being reinforced, rewarded, okay? So distribution, again, that is how it's moving around in your body, how it's distributed in your body. So you see here, we have the absorption, comes in, goes here, and then how is it distributed? What's the activity like? And then ultimately, elimination or excretion, okay? So let's look at absorption and distribution. So how the drug enters the bloodstream determines the addiction risk. Like we said, the fast routes are high risk, so inhalation, so smoking, and injection, IV, hits the brains in seconds, causes this intense rush. And then slower routes have a lower risk, so orally, swallowing, it has to pass through digestion first. Okay, and then it's distributed throughout the body. Then we have metabolism. This is your liver's job. It's the chemical factory that breaks the drug down so the kidneys can essentially pee it out. And so that would be elimination, excretion. So medication is processed and removed from the body through sweat, breast milk, your gastrointestinal tract, etc. Okay, the main path is typically through urine via your kidneys. And so the term often linked to the process of this is called half-life. So fun fact really quick, drug tests usually aren't looking for the drug, they're looking for the leftovers, the metabolites. And so that's why weed can show up as long as 30 days later, depending on how much you use and how your body metabolizes it. Okay, so let's talk about this half-life. So half-life is the time it takes to eliminate 50% of the drug's concentration from the body. It is used to determine the dosages for most medications. So for most medications, 5 to 7 half-lives are required in order for the therapeutic effect to be achieved. It's really important to understand this if we're working with clients that are taking medications with longer half-lives. If you think Valium has a very long half-life of 24 to 48 hours, and it can take 10 days for a dose to fully leave someone's system. But here, let's look at this chart here. We have Zoloft. So for Zoloft, on day 1, say you're prescribed 25 milligrams. So for Zoloft, the half-life is 24 to 26 hours. So on day 1, you take 25 milligrams. Okay, it's your first day, so you don't have any medicine remaining in your system. So the total medication in your body is 25 milligrams. Okay, the next day you wake up, you take another pill, 25 milligrams. So since the half-life is 24 hours, you take it at the same time, right? 24 to 26, meaning that it's in your body, right? 24 is half-life. Half of the dose is in your body 24 hours later. Okay, so here's half of the dose still in your body 24 hours later. And so you have 12.5 remaining. So 12.5 plus the 25 you just took, now you have 37.5 milligrams of Zoloft in your body on day 2. Now we go to day 3, you wake up, you take 25 milligrams. So at that point, you have half of this remaining, which is 18.75. So the 25 milligrams on top of the 18.75 milligrams, you have 43.75 milligrams in your body of Zoloft on day 3. You wake up day 4, you take 25 milligrams again. Well, now you have half of this, so you have 21.875 still in your body. That means on day 4, you have 46.875 milligrams, depending on how you metabolize, right, in your body. Day 5, same thing. 6, same thing. Day 7, same thing. You wake up, 25 milligrams. So for 7 days consistently, you've taken 25 milligrams of Zoloft. On the 7th day, you're operating at 49.61 per day. Okay, you're around. You see how it's changing from the first day all the way over. This is why some medicines take longer. They'll tell you, oh, you're taking antidepressant. It could take anywhere from 14 to 28 days to work because your body has to operate off the half-life they're donating, or they're compounding. The medication is compounding in your system, right? So that's important to know. And like I had mentioned, Valium half-life could be 48 hours. So that would mean that here you would see this being like over here, right? So 25, if it's half-life of 48 hours, that would still be like there. So it's important to be aware of it. It's pretty interesting. But let's stay in the math. Here's where the math gets scary, okay? So if you take Tylenol and aspirin, okay, that's 1 + 1 = 2. Simple. But if you take alcohol and benzos, then you have potentiation. Okay, so let's look. Additive, 1 + 1 = 2. Predictable. Aspirin, Tylenol, you took them both. That's fine. Antagonistic, you have heroin you take, and then Narcan. One cancels the other out. Nothing, right? And then potentiation is what I said. The synergistic relationship is the danger zone. So when one, and we're going to go into a little bit more, when one medication impacts the other, 1 + 1 is now 10. Okay, so they can multiply each other's effects. This is the danger zone. This is how most accidental overdoses happen, because mixing of medications and the drug interactions, right? So alcohol and benzos or opiates, right? They're depressants, and so they can depress respiration, and so result in respiratory failure, and that is the leading cause of accidental overdose. So let's talk about, let's go back to this idea of the thermostat that we talked about earlier. So the thermostat is tolerance. So I want you to think about this, okay? If you blast loud music at your brain every day, the brain eventually just puts in earplugs. It gets used to it. It removes the receptors, okay? So now in order for you to hear the music, you're going to have to turn the volume up even more or take more drugs just to hear it. So eventually you aren't taking drugs to get high, you're taking them just to feel normal or to get the same effect, to feel normal, whatever. So occasionally the opposite will happen, okay? So there's the exception to this rule. This is reverse tolerance or sensitization. So sometimes the body becomes more sensitive. The liver gets so damaged it can no longer process anything. This is the old alcoholic who gets drunk on one beer, right? That's because the system is failing. So this is common in stimulants and late stage alcoholism too. So finally, we need to separate the terms. So physical dependence is the body. If I stop my blood pressure medicine, I will get sick. That's dependence, right? My body needs that to function, right? With addiction, it's the behavior, okay? It's the obsession, it's the compulsive use despite negative consequences, the loss of control. So you can be dependent without being addicted, but you're rarely addicted without being dependent. And never forget the power of the mind. So the placebo effect here. If you believe you're going to have a good time, your brain actually releases its own chemicals to help you out. Expectation is half the high. Okay, expectation plays a massive role in this high. So the environment and the mindset can impact the experience, the placebo effect. So to wrap up, biology, right? Drugs hijack the body's natural homeostatic and messenger systems. Receptors, agonists open the lock, antagonists block it, right? Just like in the story, the antagonist of the story blocks it, okay? Pharmacology more leads to toxicity, not a better high. And interactions, so mixing drugs, the potentiation is the biggest physical risk. So, but to wrap up all of this, addiction isn't just bad choices, right? It's a mechanical failure. It's a light switch that got flipped on, right? It's a hijacked nervous system, a broken thermostat, a chemistry set gone wrong. Understanding this helps us to stop judging and start treating, and that's where we all need to be. So thanks for watching. See you guys later.